All right, what is up YouTube? So today I want to talk about the best decks for January of 2021. I wanted to include every single deck that a lot of people or even some people are testing on the online ladder, as well as extravaganzas and LCSs. So I just wanted to cover everything around the circle and kind of give you my opinions on all of these decks. I know the trash tier, a lot of people do not like this tier because a lot of these decks are some people's favorites, but I can't, tell you a lie. I give you my thoughts, I give you my opinions, and if they're trash tier, they're trash tier. If they're not, they're not. But I'm not, opposed to, wrong opinions. I definitely can be wrong on some of these things, and I could be proven wrong, but until I'm proven wrong, I'm definitely gonna keep the trash tier here to give you guys what is trash and what is tier 1. So let's get on with the tier list. I know there's a lot of decks to go through, so I'm gonna kind of burn through a lot of the more roguish decks and then talk more about the tier 1 deck. So Burning Abyss, I think, is rogue tier. There's just a lot of decks better than this, but it's definitely pretty decent. There's a lot of ways to play the deck though. Generators, I think, is a trash tier. I think that generators, they're only real good when condition is like VFD, and even then, if they're more of a grindier deck, like a lot of these other grindier decks just do it better. Like Eldritch, it doesn't need to rely on a field spell or one card. I mean, you do have Golden Lord, but Golden Lord is just way more accessible than something like the generator field spell. And then, Altergeist, you can get to multi-figure so many different ways. Like Guru, you have so many different ways to get to that as well. Even if you don't get to it, you still can play other cards like Numeron and Dragoon and stuff like that. So generators just overall just suck. Magidus, I don't know too much about this deck, but from what I'm seeing, definitely trash tier. Mathmex is another deck I don't know too much about, but I know a lot of people, or some people on the DB ladder, are definitely playing this deck, and they are very high rated. So I think this deck is just really solid. It's just a OTK, Oonga Booga deck, so I think it could do really, really well. Then we have Virtual Worlds. I think Virtual Worlds is definitely the tier 1 deck. I don't think there is a definitive best deck in the format, but I think there's a lot of good decks. We have, Virtual Worlds and then the other tier 1 decks I'll get into in a bit. But Virtual Worlds is definitely one of the best decks in the game, if not the deck to beat in this format. Then we have Infernoble. Infernoble is definitely something like tier 3. I think it's definitely better than, Burning Abyss and Mathmex, but I don't think it's better than, something like Virtual Worlds. It's definitely not a tier 2 because this deck definitely fell in popularity. There's not many people playing it, but I still think it has a lot of potential to be, really good. This deck only lost Link Cross in the Smoke Grenade, which Link Cross did hurt a lot, but you still have a Rorodon, you have Halka-Frybrax, you have every single combo piece, like a Soul, like there's so many different extenders in this deck. Connector is still like an FTK, like this deck is still really solid. It's just that the boards that it makes is not as strong, and it's kind of mediocre compared to something like Virtual Worlds, because a lot of the Infernoble players are making VFD, which Virtual Worlds just do it better. So it's definitely very solid, definitely better than the Rogue tier decks, but I don't think it's anything more than something like tier 3, at least right now. Then we have Monarchs. It's just trash tier. The deck just bricks way too much, and even when it doesn't brick, it's just not good enough. Guru, definitely rogue tier. There's a lot of different people just on the ladder grinding this deck, and it's doing pretty well. I mean, even at, events, they're doing pretty well. Guru, it's just like, if you get the setup, it's pretty much an FTK. And if you get your opponent low on resources, you're pretty much winning. So Guru, definitely very good. It definitely gets pushed in by something like Virtual Worlds, Drytron, Eldritch, because they can just break through this. But if they can't break through the whole Hidden City, Final Battle Guru setup, it's just not looking good. And Guru can definitely grind through that, especially with something like Dragoon in the Numeron engine, because those cards are just FTKs versus some decks. Fluffles, I think it's rogue tier. I think it just falls short to these other combo decks in the format. Also, the other, like, OTKing in this deck is not really good when you have something like Virtual Worlds. Like, you need multiple different cards to, like, OTK, and you probably need multiple different cards to stop it. So you have to have, like, a really good combination of hand traps and combo cards to kind of OTK Virtual Worlds, Drytron, and Eldritch. So Fluffles, definitely rogue tier, definitely very solid, especially going first, because you have stuff like the Dagda, which can pretty much shut down, like, you know, Virtual Worlds and Drytron and stuff like that. So pretty good. Orchest, I don't want to be too harsh on Orchest, but man, this deck it's just not that good, man. I know I'm gonna get a lot of hate for this, but Orchest is just not good. It bricks so much. It loses the one hand trap a lot. Like, it's just so mediocre compared to Orchest back in 2019, where you could just play through a lot with the Sky Striker stuff. You had the Lunalight stuff that made Azathoth, so you were protected from hand traps. Orchest just fell down way too hard on its face. I would potentially put this in the rogue tier, but the deck is just not worth playing. I definitely think Fluffles is better, because at least Fluffles can play around hand traps. Then we have Madolche, another deck that is kind of fragile to hand traps, but it definitely plays more, you know, against hand traps than something like Orchest. That's why I think it's better, because yeah, if they stop Mageline, it's, you know, it could be pretty bad, but if you have the Petting Successor already, like, you could play through it. There's other ways to play around, you know, hand traps. So Madolches are definitely a little fragile to hand traps, but when you get set up, you have a really good setup, especially follow-up turns, because a lot of people, these, you know, combo decks, they have like setup, but they don't have follow-ups, which is really bad. But Madolches definitely have follow-ups. When you have something like Hoot Cake that's protected by something like Angeli, so you can, you know, next turn add it to your hand or special summon it with something like the Ticket, or you have, you know, all these other different cards that searches, you know, Hoot Cake. So Madolche is definitely very good, very solid, but definitely a little bit, you know, fragile to hand traps, and it's just not better than, you know, the tier 1 decks. Zephyr, I'm a little biased. I think Zephyr is definitely tier 3. I think this deck is definitely very solid. It doesn't really lose hard to VFD. You could potentially play around VFD, because you don't really need to, you know, use effects that much. I mean, all you really need in terms of monster effects is Nui, Zephyr Nui. But for the most part, you're just using all of the utility cards of your Divine Wrath, your Zephyr Path, using all of these different spell and trap cards of the Zephyr archetype that you don't really need to activate monster effects. So in Zephyr, just going first, you set up like counter traps, you set up Path. Like, Path is generally an FTK versus a lot of different decks. So definitely Zephyr is very solid. I know a lot of, you know, Zephyr players are playing this on the ladder. There's definitely been some representation, more in the OCG, because they have, you know, Danglong and, you know, other stuff like that. But Zephyr definitely really solid, even in the TCG. Shaddoll, I think, is... I'm going to go with a bold prediction. I'm going to say Shaddoll is tier 2. I think Winda outright just really shuts down a lot of these different decks. I think it's a really good anti-meta, you know, call. Because one Winda just stops, like, Virtual Worlds, Drytron, like, even it hurts Eldritch as well. So having something like... Winda is just really, really solid, especially if you could summon 2. A lot of people deal with 1, but, you know, pretty much no one can, you know, deal with 2 Windas, which is very, very good. And the deck has stuff like Aerial, which banishes 3, so it destroys something like Drytron, which is really, really nice. It has Dragon. It has a lot of utility with these Shaddoll cards. So I think, you know, Shaddoll is definitely pretty decent. Mech Knights, trash tier. No one's really playing Mech Knights. Mech Knights are just not good. Going second is just not good, especially with Virtual Worlds and Drytron setting up like Ruler and VFD, so yeah, it's pretty bad. Dinosaurs, I thought this was gonna be tier 1, but when I realized VFD was still in the game, I was like, yeah, going second with this deck is very poor. But I'm gonna say Dinosaurs is definitely tier 3. I think they're still a really good deck. I just think they have really horrible matchups like Drytron and Virtual Worlds and Eldritch, but they're still very solid. They can definitely still beat Virtual Worlds, Drytron, and Eldritch, but they still have a disadvantage of just not being able to OTK going second. Unless they play absurd going second cards like Gamma to stop the Virtual World, or, you know, hand traps in general to stop them from summoning VFD. Drytron, you gotta stop the Ruler and play around the Orange Light and stuff like that, Ultimateness. And then Eldritch, you just gotta play Lightning Storm to get rid of their back row. So Dino's definitely very good, very solid. Misk is still a card that's really strong, but it kind of struggle going second. Buster Blader, I think it's kind of rogue. It's kind of a meta call. It was only really strong when Dragon Link was a thing, but now that Dragon Link is not as strong as it was, you know, last format, it's kind of like a meta call at the end of the day. Like, all these rogue decks are more of meta calls. You don't look at rogue decks as, oh, this deck is very decent. You have to say, like, is this, you know, rogue deck good enough to compete with the other, you know, top tier decks? And if not, it's not rogue. If it's, you know, bad, it's in the trash tier. So that's pretty good. Infernoids, I think it's just very trash tier. Ever since they lost Grass, you know, Reasoning and stuff like that, like, all these mill cards, Infernoids is just not good. Even with Monster Gate at 3, I think Monster Gate's at 3, Infernoids is just not good. Like, Void Feast is really strong going first, but yeah, Infernoids just struggle. Thunder Dragon, I've been seeing a lot of Thunder Dragon in the rogue tier, kind of, you know, competing on the ladder and, you know, in online events. I think Thunder Dragon is very decent, especially with Dragoon and, you know, all these different engines in the, you know, the deck, you know, rockets, just all these chaos engines are just really good with Thunder Dragons, which is why Thunder Dragon is still rogue tier. It's still like the combo deck that's like not superior to something like Virtual Worlds and Drytron, but it's definitely still very decent. Colossus is still a very powerful card. So, or not, did I say Colossus? Titan. Titan is a very good card. ABCs, I think they're definitely rogue tier. Once you get out ABC Buster Dragon, like, this deck is just really hard to beat. If you don't have something like DD Crow, like, even DD Crow after they, you know, summon the Buster Dragon, is still really hard to beat this deck because they just get so many resources from just this one card. But if they can't get to it, they just auto lose. So it's kind of like Dragon Buster or Bust, which is kind of bad when you really think about it, but this card is so good on its own, especially when you get to cycle through all of your ABC pieces. It's just really good. Cyber Dragons, this trash tier. It's another going second deck that doesn't really set up anything good going first. It just doesn't do anything really good right now. Like, going first, it doesn't do anything better than the tier 1 decks. Going second, it doesn't do anything good because Virtual World makes VFD and Drytron makes Vanity's Ruler, so it's really poor. Goki, another combo deck, really good. Trash going second against Virtual Worlds and Drytron. Still really good, making the board. Altergeist. I think Altergeist is tier 3. I think because of the representation, it's not very solid, but I think it's definitely worthy of something like tier 2 at most. I don't think it's definitely tier 1. I think because of the representation, Altergeist is definitely tier 3. It's definitely very solid against all of the, you know, decks, Virtual Worlds, Drytron, and Eldritch. It could, like, Hexia is just like an FTK once you get that card out the field or on the field, but it's still, like, not as good as something like Eldritch, you know, as a grind deck. So, Altergeist, definitely very solid. You have Melusi, you have Multi-Figure at 3. You have, you know, Protocol being able to protect all your monsters from being negated. Really solid deck. Just missing the mark on being a solid tier 2 or tier 1 deck. Zodiac, I think Zodiac is tier 2 at best. I think tier 2 is where we're going to see this deck at. Is really reliant on you having that Zodiac stick on the board and then summon Zeus. And then even then, if you can't get to a Zodiac card, or you can't top deck a Zodiac card after your board gets wiped, it is very bad. But this deck is super solid against a lot of the rogue decks. And then if you can stop like the tier 1 decks from comboing off, this deck is insane because Zeus is such a powerful card. Like this, like, oh my god, Zeus is like what made this deck tier 2 at this point. Everything else is just, I mean, the deck is super consistent. You have Tanky, all the Zodiacs get you to Borbo, which gets you into Zeus. Like the deck is very solid. You can play a lot of hand traps. I just feel like a lot of people are playing this deck wrong. Like a lot of people are throwing in Eldritch, cutting, you know, hand traps and stuff like that. You shouldn't cut your utility cards like hand traps and floodgates. You'll probably be playing Pure Zoo with like Mistake and Summon Limit maybe, you know, stuff like that. You know, Skullmeister Ash, DD Crow, Valor, not Valor, but you know, Gamma, like all these good hand traps, utility cards, you should be playing it. But yeah, Zoo is just, you know, Zeus the deck, so it's pretty solid. Metagame Invoke, I thought this deck was going to be much better than I thought, but it's definitely tier 3. I think it's way better than the rogue tier stuff, but it's just really cut short due to the deck being a little bit inconsistent. Even though you have a lot of, you know, you have a lot of searchers in this deck. You might think that like a deck with so many searchers, Nadir Servant, Alistair, Terraforming, Magical Meltdown, you have Ecclesia, you have all these cards that searches, but the deck is still inconsistent. You have so many bricks you can draw. You might have like a mediocre hand of like Punishment, Fleur de Lis, Maximus, you know, maybe some hand traps, and it's just not that good some of the time. And you know, when you do have the good setup of like Ecclesia, you know, Invoker, like all those, you know, really solid cards like Nadir Servant, it is definitely very strong. But when it's really bad, it's really bad when you draw a bad hand. Prank Kids, I think it's definitely a tier 2 deck. I think this is a little bit high for what it is, but I think Prank Kids is at its best, it's tier 2 because this deck can play through a lot of hand traps. It can play a lot of hand traps. It can grind, it can OTK, it has all of this going for it, but it still loses the VFD, still loses the ruler, still, I mean, it does really well against Eldritch, so that's really good. It also does good against, you know, Zodiac. Winda is a problem, so it has a lot of good things going about it. It's just not making the cut because going second against, you know, Virtual Road and Drytron is just not really good. But the deck is just super solid at what it does, which is, you know, grind through, have a lot of hand trap, draw a bunch of cards with stuff like pranks. You have, you know, the engine of just having one Prank Hits monster is just like full combo. So definitely a very solid deck. I just don't think it's the cut of tier 1. I think this is definitely tier 3 at you know, at worst, because it's just a very solid deck all around. Zombies, this deck is not, it's not good, please, no. One DD Crawl on the Balrog or messing with Zombie Road is just GG. Max, I think, or not Max, Magical Musketeers or Magibullets, whatever you want to call the deck. I'm going to make a bold prediction and say it's rogue tier. It's probably way higher than it should be. It probably should be in trash tier, but Max is just a powerful card that is just really solid. But the Magibullet cards are just kind of sucky, especially if you lose your one Magibullet card in the field. Like, all of your Magibullet cards are dead, and if the deck can't get going, it's just super terrible. But when you get your, you know, max, you know, add 3 cards or summon 3 monsters, the deck is pretty much in a good spot. I mean, you're probably winning at that point, but when it gets stopped, it gets hard stopped. Like, the deck is just, it just loses outright. So it has its, you know, advantages, it has, you know, big disadvantages, but still really solid. Mystic Mine, this shit is broken. It should be tier 1 because this card should be banned, but Mystic Mine is trash tier. Don't even acknowledge it. A lot of the very, very casual players that just hate meta are probably playing the deck. So Mystic Mine as a card is like tier 0, but Mystic Mine as a deck, trash tier. Dragon Maid's definitely rogue tier. There's a lot of people playing around with it. You still have the Dragon Link stuff. You can splash in it. You have Tidying. You have Chamber. The deck is still very solid. You have a lot of grind game with the deck, so definitely very solid. Just not as good as the other combo decks. Striker. I've been very harsh on this deck recently, but I think with the meta shift, I think Striker is still very solid. I mean, I would say it's tier 3. It can break through a lot of boards. It's just really hard to out Dragoon. Like if you face Dragoon, like you auto lose. You auto lose. But against Virtual Worlds, it has a decent matchup. Against Drytron, decent matchup. Like it has decent matchups all around the board. It's just it doesn't really have much of a win condition. Like Hayate poke until you get game, or wait until you can like push for game with like access code. Stuff like that is the only way to play this deck, or push out damage. So until they get something like really good to where they can push out damage and close the game out more quicker, the deck is just, it's not good enough. Eldritch, I think it's tier 1. This deck is in literally every deck. It's splashed into everything. It's just really good. Even as a deck itself is just really, really good. Adamant Spader, I think this is tier 3. A lot of people are, you know, testing with this deck. There's a lot of good combos with this deck. Just a researcher can get you so much with this deck. You have Guardian to protect you from hand traps. You have Herald. You have Crystal Wing that can also, you know, stop hand traps earlier on if you do make those. It's a very solid deck. It does lose to Dryden or, you know, Zodiacs in general if you don't have something to pop that Zoo before they attack and go into Zeus and stuff like that. So this is like your main, you know, like counter, but you have a decent matchup around the board, at least going first. Going second against VFD, I said this a million times, but VFD Vantage Ruler is just not good to go against, especially going second with a combo deck. Evil Twin, I want to give this the trash tier treatment, but it's rogue. It's definitely rogue. A lot of people are playing it. A lot of people are testing it out. It is doing decent on the local level and on the online level, but it's just not making a cut when it comes to tier 3/tier 1 decks. Heroes, I think this is definitely... I know a lot of hero players are gonna be mad at me, but it's trash tier, man. You can't go second in this format with heroes, and even going first. Like a Dark Law is not gonna do anything. A Dynastopia, whatever the card is called, is not gonna do nothing to like a deck that can, you know, negate the card with something like Qinglao, or have so many extenders to where you could break the board, or have something like Eldritch that can just, you know, get rid of anything that's problematic on your board. Heroes just don't have anything good going for it. There's no benefit when playing heroes. DDD, another trash tier deck. I know some people in the comments were talking about DDD is good, but like until they prove otherwise, like the deck is trash tier. Mutants, I'm not gonna be harsh with this deck. I think this deck is pretty decent. I think it's definitely a rogue tier. I just think a lot of people are just not playing the deck. I think the deck does have an FCK card in something like Dimensional Shifter, because that card, oh my god, is so good against every single deck across the board. And it's really good when it gets going, but the problem is when you don't get going with this deck, it's just really crap. Like you could just lose outright to a lot of these combo decks, and especially something like Eldritch, that when they get set up, and you just lose. Or Prank Kids, when they get set up, they get set up. So definitely rogue. I don't think it's anything better. Rockets, tier 3. Another combo deck that's in the tier 3 category, just not as good as the other combo decks. PK, same thing as well. Tri Brigade, I'm gonna say this deck is rogue. I've seen a lot of decent combos with like the Barrier Statue and, you know, all the different Beast Warrior type cards, you know, the Infinity Negate combo. You have something like the Leer Lust, that's just really good. But Tri-Brigades, they just need a little bit more. I'm not going to be super harsh on this deck because it does do something good. There is an advantage to playing this deck. It's just not as good as any of the other decks above it. Drytron, tier 1 deck. There's nothing really to say. Ben 10 is just a super solid card. This deck can OTK with Natasha. You can, search a lot of your different cards. This deck can put out like a ton of negates. Vanity's Ruler, Herald of Ultimateness for multiple negates. Like, the deck is just very, very good. I definitely think this is, these three are definitely the best decks of the format. Let's move on to the next one. Unchained. I think it's definitely the tier 3. I think it's way better than all of these rogue tier decks. And it has more representation than all of these other rogue tier decks, but it's just not having the cut. I mean, you have a lot of utility in that the deck, you only really need like about 16 to 18 engine cards, and then all the rest of the cards are like hand traps and just everything else, like trap cards. You can play like Lightning Storm, stuff like that. So Unchained, really solid tier 3 deck. Megalith, this is more of like a more pure Megalith build. I think they're definitely rogue tier, but the deck just really fell off with Block Dragon getting banned. And especially because we don't have the Divine Herald card that... It's an OCG exclusive. I'll probably put it up on the screen or something like that. But it's like the OCG exclusive card that works with a lot of these ritual monsters. But before we get that, like, Megalith is not that good. Unless you're playing Drytron. Then Drytron, Megalith is like tier 2 to tier 1. I think that build is definitely very solid though. Grand Maju, another OTK deck. It's better than a lot of these OTK decks that are here. You can play a lot of hand traps. You can play Dimensional Shifter, which is like an FTK, as I said before, but going second against Virtual Worlds is just not good. UA, trash tier. They're missing a lot. I mean, their support did help. It's definitely very solid, but just missing the cut. And a lot of people are not playing this deck. Like, I don't really see anybody playing UAs. There's probably like 1 or 2 players playing it, and not very often in the online scene. Pendulums or Endymion, it's like rogue. I mean, even Triff is not like doing super well in the competitive level with something like Endymion. He's like the quote unquote pen god. So Endymion, it's nothing better than rogue. I mean, you might see like a few top, but for the most part, Endymion's not really good. Mermel's another solid combo deck. I mean, if they don't stop Diva, then you just win. Or they don't stop Nephthys, you just win. But if they stop Diva or Nephthys, you're just kind of just losing. The deck is not, and even going second, like, you have to play a lot of hand traps, and then like now you probably burn through all of your hand. You probably don't have any other water monsters. Even if you draw something like Nephthys, you can't really OTK with just Nephthys unless you're playing like, I don't know, something very obscure. But besides that, Merma's just, it's not anything more than rogue tier. Same thing with Salamangreats, nothing more than rogue tier. Salamangreats are just, I mean, they have stuff going with it, like engines like Verte. You could splash in the Eldritch engine. It has some decent engines you could play in the deck, but overall, until we get Circle, Mirage, get Zelda 3, this deck is not anything near tier 3 or even tier 2 or tier 1. And then we have Frogs. I think Frogs is definitely tier 3. With trap decks being relevant in the format, I think Frogs are definitely very good. The one main problem that keeps it from tier 2 and tier 1 is that the deck is just swap or bust. Like, if you don't draw Swap Frog, the deck is just super mediocre. Like, I don't know how much to say it. You set a Dupe Frog, okay. If they stop it from missing timing or they make it miss timing, the deck is just, you can't get your engine going. If you can't get your engine going, you just lose. You gotta just like hope your Paleos can stick on the field so you can be totally awesome. But besides that, like, the deck is still pretty good. I mean, like, you have Dynamiscus, you have Ice Dragon Prison, you have Torrential, like, all these really good trap cards, but can't get your engine rolling, you cannot play. And frogs are not the most consistent deck in the meta. So that was my ultimate tier list. I wanted to kind of cover all of the different decks. Let me know if you want a more shorter video. I know this is very long and I've probably rambled on for way too long, but I did want to cover a lot of the rogue tier stuff to kind of give you opinions on those as well as the tier 1 decks, because a lot of people do know what the tier 1 decks is, the tier 2 and the tier 3. But I did want to give you a discussion on more of the rogue stuff and my opinions on them. So, hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. Rambled on long enough. I'm out of breath. I probably need to drink some water or something. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. I'm out. Peace.